Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We'll start in 3 more minutes and we'll give it a little bit of time to people to join. So in those 3 minutes, I recommend you take your coffee, your waters, or go to the bathroom because it's going to be an interesting, insightful webinar. So thank you again for joining us from wherever you're joining us. Bom dia, buenos dias, good morning. My name is Alan Wagenberg. I'm the Director of Knowledge Management at Impacto. Thank you everybody for joining us here today. I'd like to first welcome Belissa and Michael, who will be giving us a lot of insights about where impact measuring and management is heading. So first of all, introduce Belissa, who starts first. Belissa, muy buenos días, ¿cómo estás?
Buenos días, Alan. Muy contenta de estar con ustedes hoy día y con la super presentación. Espero cumplir con las expectativas de todos y escucharlos y responder sus preguntas, por favor. Gracias.
Gracias. Pues Belissa, les cuento un poquito sobre Belissa. Belissa es la CEO de una consultora llamada Impacto Consulting y ella también está trabajando y asesorando a las Naciones Unidas en el desarrollo del SDG Impact. Muy contenta de tenerte acá. Tienes 20 años de experiencia en temas de sostenibilidad, desarrollo internacional, fundaciones. Eres, si no estoy mal, de una doble nacionalidad peruana-argentina y tienes una historia interesante sobre tu papá, si no estoy mal, que es jugador de fútbol o fue jugador de fútbol, ¿no? Muy interesante.
Peruano y fue al Mundial, campeonó la Copa Libertadores, la Copa América con Independiente de Avellaneda, así que sí, pero nació en la época en que no nos los hacían millonarios, lamentablemente.
Thank you, Belissa. And then obviously we have Michael. Michael is the Executive Director of Impact Frontiers, and he serves as the Head of Investor Collaboration at the Impact Management Project. He used to also be the Head of Impact at Root Capital and work for Monitor Company, and he has a very impressive CV. Belissa, you've been working a lot with Michael, so maybe you can also tell us a little bit about Michael and more than his CV, What do you admire of him?
Well, Mike is fantastic. He's a great professional, very knowledgeable, super thorough, one of the best in IMM, I would say right now globally. So you really have the best here, but even better person. So can you imagine that? He's a loyal friend, very honest, very friendly, patient. So, I mean, you can see that I really, our story goes a long way, but very happy to be with Mike here today, and Alan. Yeah, so you will have the best soon, and gear up because he's brought today a lot of interesting material to share with you.
I just have to say thank you for those very kind comments. And I feel the same way about you, Belissa, and I'm so happy to be here, Ellen, and hello to everybody. I want to recognize two of my limitations. One of them is my Spanish, and I apologize that I'm not able to address you in Spanish. Another limitation is that I have no relationship or linkage to the world of football. So in those ways, I'm very, very, very behind, but hopefully we can have a good webinar anyway.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael and Belissa. So Belissa, tell us about what you see in terms of impact management and what are the new trends. I don't know if you want to project your presentation. Yes. You want me to do it for you?
Yes, you scared me. I thought you were going off script, but no, I go back to my presentation now. Awesome. So today I have brought a presentation for you to try to, to give you with something that you can go back to after this. So are you seeing my screen? Yes, awesome. Sorry, I'm just trying to get ready to see. Okay, perfect. So, perfect. And Alan, I'm gonna ask you because my watch just disappeared that you tell me when I have 5 minutes to go, okay? So I'll make sure I manage the time well. So, well, today we're here with Impacto. Thanks again, Alan, for the invitation and all of you for being here today. And Mike, it's an honor to be in this panel with you. So I'm going to talk very briefly, I will try, about, the context that brings, me here today in relation to my work with the UN and SDG Impact. And I will tell you all about it and what it is and what do we mean by SDG Impact. I also want to talk to you about the business case for sustainability, meaning why should the private sector bother with impact topics that were traditionally in the development sector, right? Impact on people and planet. And then I will tell you how SDG Impact relates to that, and a tool that for me is really one of the latest in terms of IMM trends, which is the SDG Impact Standards. So this is what we're going to talk about today. And as context, I think this image, I picked the pictures myself. I think they're a little bit dramatic, but that's exactly the effect I wanted, right? We have so many things to worry about, the climate, but inequality. And I really like this picture on the left because it shows, that poverty and inequality, when we talk about climate change, it affects even worse those that are already vulnerable, right? So it really shows that our challenges are huge. And basically, what we are seeing is that the private sector needs to increasingly take a role on this if we are to solve, the challenges that we're facing today. And that also includes COVID, the pandemic, the risk of new diseases and everything we're seeing in the world. And the key message here is, that the private sector has a role if we want to address this. Interestingly, and I also like this statistic from PwC, they study that 72% of companies mention the SDGs in their reports, but actually only 1% of them have actual metrics. So meaning, we also talk about alignment to the SDGs and how we want to contribute and mobilize capital, but what about the actual results? So this is just to show you that there's interest, but there's a gap. Another interesting data point that I would like to share with you, the principle for responsible investment signatories. Altogether, they account for more than 110 trillion millions of assets. And you could think, okay, if all these millions of dollars are, towards responsible investment, why are we having so many problems? So that says something, right? Maybe there's something we're not doing. And the same with this $35 trillion invested in sustainability, that, okay, we're doing all this effort, but what is happening? So that's something I wanted to reflect with you today. And I think a month ago, the OECD reported, these very, doom statistics that before the pandemic, the gap to achieve the SDGs was about $2.5 trillion, and now it has increased in 70%. So my idea today was not to get us all depressed. It's just to see it in the following way. Okay, this is the magnitude of the challenge we're facing, right? How big it is, where it comes from. And they find two major obstacles in the report. And of course, one is allocating more capital towards the SDGs. But the second one is also, once you, for example, decide to invest in an area that can potentially have impact, how do we deliver that impact? So two main things: what do we do and how do we do it, right? What are the areas of focus and how we go about actually achieving change and impact? So, and this is really a reflection again. We are seeing that there's, a lot of needs, lots of efforts, lots of money going towards SDGs, but there are a lot of challenges that remain. And then I like to quote Einstein that said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use when we create them. So this is really a call for thinking creatively about, okay, what should we be doing differently if we are to achieve, the goals that we want to achieve in terms of impact and address our global challenges, given that many intentions are there already. Basically, in my work with the UN and SDG Impact, and I'll tell a minute about what it is exactly, something that we've been reflecting on is to change the view of what an organization should be doing. And I think this graph kind of reflects it kind of well. So instead of thinking an organization as an independent, alone entity, you see it as a part of a system that impacts that system and is impacted by it. And therefore, there are interdependencies, right? So for example, instead of look at an egocentric view, you're going to look at an ecocentric view, right? The interdependencies and how, they affect the broad impact. Thinking about long-term sustainability, and also something important, and I'm sure Mike can help me explaining this in case I fall short, not thinking about the organization as an entity to produce only profit, but also to create value for society and for the environment, right, for people and planet. So it's really a shift about how we do business and how we invest. And the way I like to think of this is the following. When we think about, what's the new normal? So I imagine a new normal when profit maximization is not what we're looking for only in monetary terms, but also positive impact on people and planet. But then you might wonder, okay, that sounds fantastic, but why would we do that? Are there costs of doing this? Are there risks of doing this? And of course, there's always risks, but that makes life interesting. So, but what is the business case really for this new way of doing business and investing? And I got some statistics to share with you. There are studies that show that only working on gender equity can increase the size of the global economy by 26%. So this is like an economic and financial argument for focusing on sustainable development. Also, the 12 trillion annual business, $12 trillion in business opportunities that can be unlocked only in few sectors such as food, agriculture, cities, and energy. So this statistics is just to illustrate that there's a business case to encourage private sector to focus on sustainable development and finding solutions that address those problems. And here I try to summarize, and then you will have a chance to read it. But for example, if a company or an investor focus on environmental and social aspects, they will have a better risk management system that is going to ensure their financial profitability, but also their sustainability in the long term. They have a better reputation, they can attract better employees. We know also, for example, that the millennials are a driving force in the demand globally, asking for more sustainable products. So there is an untapped market and a market that is changing. And what we believe in UNDP is that this is an untapped possibility for financial gain too, right? While having positive impact. And summarizing, as an example, for example, we can have developing products and services for unserved and underserved markets, and also respond to an increasing demand. All of that I will share, so there's more detail on each slide, but something that beyond the financial gain and beyond financial profits and having positive impact, something that it's for UNDP, again, very important, and for me too, is the respect for human rights, for example. What is the minimum that we need to achieve in the way we operate and we run business in general? And if there is a lower bar, the minimum bar that we are not yet there, right? And it's about realizing that do no harm is kind of the bare minimum, right? There's opportunities for having positive impact, but there's at least many options and alternatives if companies and investors really try to have a world where there is no harm that they're generating given their decisions and their actions. So yeah, the new normal, a world where business and investors don't have sustainability as an add-on, but at the core of the way they just operate. Okay, so that's the vision that we imagine. So what is SDG Impact? So SDG Impact is part of the UNDP, and it's a flagship initiative of the UNDP that was really born a couple of years ago to help allocating capital towards the achievement of the SDGs and doing that efficiently. And to do that, we developed three main pillars of work. And so we remember, that's how I like to talk about this. Impact intelligence is about the what or where. In what are we supposed to be focusing on, right? So there are many options. And I always give this very simple example. For example, California has issues with drought, right? There's water scarcity and there are issues with that and fires. And where I live in Maryland, there's issues with flooding. So if you have a water management project in California for flooding, is not the same thing as you have it in Maryland, right? So even if it's water management and you can say, oh, everything we do is good, everything we do is for the SDGs, actually, if you consider the local context, not necessarily. There are some things that are going to be more impactful than others, right? And we need to be careful about that and not maybe think about taking decisions based on our preference, but on the information and the data of the local context. So impact intelligence, imagine, is, okay, in which areas are we supposed to focus? What are we supposed to do? And we have a product that I will put after in the chat, in a platform that really shows you examples in countries where this exercise has been done to guide investment opportunity areas that would give the private sector investors two things, both profits, financial profits, and impact. So that's the intelligence part. But then, as I said earlier, once you have identified where you want to focus, the other part of the question is, okay, how do I ensure that I deliver, the investment or the enterprise deliver its products in an efficient way? And Mike is going to talk about that a lot in a little bit, but it's really about the how, right? Making it effective, cost efficient to really achieve our goals. And something to remember is that alignment to the SDGs or to sustainable development is not actual impact. Right, is the beginning of the journey to really achieve the results we want. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the third pillar is really about impact facilitation, and think of it as matchmaking, right? The speed dating, when you just investors, meet companies and they get together for opportunities to see if they have similar interests and investment opportunities that are sustainable and transactions can occur. And also we engage the public sector on that. So the enabling environment is the right one to promote this type of sustainable market transactions. We were born in 2018, and I will tell you a little bit about our products and where we are today. But the legend says, because I was not there, that there was this UN General Assembly, and all the big bosses were there thinking about how to make the world a better place, and maybe thinking that they were not doing as great as they thought, because there were many principles out there, and that's why they said that there were the principles for human rights, for gender equality, women's rights, but the change was not really tangible, that there was a lot to do still. And basically what they thought is that they needed different products to address the challenges, that more principles wouldn't move the needle. And I tell you in a minute more about that. So they were born in 2018. They test the market with the standards and tools I'm going to talk to you about in the next slides. And the market received them very well. And now, 3 years later, we have the SDG Impact Standards, which is the main focus of the presentation today, and other tools for what? Again, to help investors and companies align, their activities towards the SDGs and sustainable development, and do it so in the most efficient and effective way. So what are the SDG Impact Standards? So Alan talked about impact measurement and management, right? That I would talk to you about the latest trends in IMM. And the SDG Impact Standards are really part of the IMM, I would say, toolbox that's available in the market. But what they do is instead of focusing on performance, which is actual results, they are all about a different way of managing businesses and doing investments. And this is really, really, really important. And that's why I focus on that today, because we're used more to reporting standards, to metrics. And this is really about how to take decisions differently. And this links really nice to the second part of the presentation today, because Mike is going to give you an example of trade-offs in terms of the trade-offs that decision makers face when they make decisions. So these standards are for decision making. And in a nutshell, imagine that the CEO of your enterprise wakes up tomorrow and decides that quarterly reports are not only financial and about sales or revenues, they are also about impact, because the company has impact goals. And imagine all the implications of that, how your report would change, your policies, the data you collect, the conversations you have, how you will look at if you have the desire of having positive impact or doing no harm, everything that would change in your company in terms of the day-to-day. So the company is really embedding, or the investor is really embedding impact at the core. So that's what the standards are about, really a different way of managing. Sometimes when I present them, I'm asked, okay, but where are the standardized metrics? And I hope you know by now, this is not about the metrics. This is about which data I need to take decisions. So it's very different than the traditional, I would say, IMM. For your reference, we have 4 sets of standards. Standards for enterprises, private equity funds, bond issuers, and the one we did with OECD for development finance organizations. I'm not sure, maybe Alan can help me, but I think many of you are working private equity funds. And so that would be relevant for you. And it's also pretty applicable to VC funds. You might wonder, oh my God, more standards, more tools. I knew IRIS Plus, I knew IMP, the 5 dimensions, and now this lady comes with the SDG Impact Standards. So why? What is this? Why another set of tools? And basically, if we go back to what the legend says, that there were many principles, there were many tools, but what they felt is there was a missing piece in the middle. And the missing piece in the middle is really about managing for impact. Okay, and when I talk about impact, it's economic, social, and environmental. It's not only because you want to solve the word poverty, it's also about doing no harm, caring about climate change. So when I talk about impact, it's under that definition, right? So it's embedding impact in your decision making, whatever your impact goal is, okay? So that's really important. So they really come here to fill a gap. And you will see from your private sector experience and management experience that the way the standards are organized are around strategy. And strategy, what is it? Okay, what is the context in which I'm operating? What's my competitive advantage? What are the impact goals that are reasonable given the context, the local needs, and my competitive advantage? So that's very familiar to standard business practices or investment practices. Then the management approach is really about, okay, you have a goal, but then you need to do a plan to implement it. And you have policies, process, resources, people that you're going to put in place to deliver on those goals. Then the transparency is really about reporting, which is now you're going to share and report how is it that you're doing this whole thing about delivering on your impact goals. And then finally, the governance, which is a structure to support that everything, has the right incentives and works together in a coherent way. So again, maybe I hope you're not disappointed, because more than talking about impact per se and impact management, I'm hoping that you feel that I'm talking more about, okay, this is just the way we do business, but with this impact chip now here right next to the dollars, the impact. And this is exactly what the standards are. And that's what they're new and different in that way. We have a lot of resources in the website that I'm going to share with you also on the chat. But we have organized for each type of standards, because for private equity, enterprises, etc., some business actions that will help you to understand the sequence to implement these standards, if that's what you would like to do. So for example, if we take strategy, okay, do you have the goal? What's your impact thesis or theory of change? How your actions are coming to solve that development problem. Okay, are you measuring your goals, right? It's how are you going to update this? So it's very, simple sequences that are linked to the practice indicators that you will find in the standards that are published in the website. In terms of what is this useful for, as we said, there are different stakeholders that can use it. We have seen policymakers and governments encouraging to use the standards for enterprises to move towards sustainable development. There's also conversations about including, for example, in procurement, that's one option. Investors will have a sense of what's the signaling of enterprises and private equity funds that are not only aligned to the standards, but have a management system set up to maximize that positive contribution to sustainable development. Enterprises will have a set of tools that are really based on best practices, and we're not reinventing the wheel. When you're going to see our guidelines, you will see that we refer to a lot of tools, including, a very famous platform that is putting all the standards together. So it's going to be all linked, so we don't reinvent the wheel. But what the standard gives you that's unique is that framework to see where everything fits together and somehow make sure that if you want to have an optimal system for managing for impact or for doing no harm, you know what to look for. This is just to tell you that we have worked with many private equity funds, and also in the next few months, we're going to be working with implementation groups that these are private equity funds or enterprises interested in adapting the standards. So if that's something that you're interested on learning more, please contact me.
Belissa, you have 2 more minutes.
Perfect. I have 2 more slides. I'm doing it. I'm happy. And then in terms of resources available, I will put all of this in the chat. You have glossary, guidance notes. We are launching an IMM course with Duke University that's going to be available for free in Coursera online. And we have some advisory service too, master classes, working groups, and many things that you can just reach out, and we'll be happy to provide you that information. Everything we do is a public good. So all the resources are available for free, and our goal is to help you achieve your goals. So I really encourage you to contact us. And finally, and this is my last slide, all these standards are voluntary, right? So the idea is, okay, everybody that really wants to contribute to solve, our global challenges, they will have, their part on this. But how to do that? What does it mean? So the standards try to set that, and they're voluntary. But if you remember correctly at the beginning, if I said it correctly, we said that we have 2 problems, right? Allocating more capital towards the SDGs and actually delivering impact. And there's a lot of noise in terms of what is real impact versus impact washing, window dressing. So what we are developing today is what we call assurance, the assurance framework. So basically what it will be is that those that want to adopt the standards will have the opportunity to get it assured and have an impact seal. That does not mean that they do no harm at all or they got it all right. It really means that they're committed to getting to this path towards a new way of doing business and investing that contributes to the SDGs and sustainable development and is based on continuous improvement. The bar I won't like to use very high because it's very comprehensive, but at the same time, we also acknowledge that it's a journey to get there and it's going to take time. And we're hoping that we're going to be with you on that journey and put all the resources we have available to help you and hopefully achieve this together. So that's all from me, and I give back the mic to Alan, but I just want to say that when you look at my presentation, something that I really like that connects really well with this is I have options. How do I compare impact and returns? How do I make decisions? Are all impact equals? So Mike is going to really talk about that and give you a specific tool that to help on this decision-making process that fits really well both ways with the standards. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Belissa. And before we move on to Mike, I wanted to see if there was any questions, any pressing questions that you had in your mind, and then we will ask Mike to share his presentation. From my standpoint, Belissa, I just wanted to understand or ask you from your experience, since you talked about, you know, the minimum being doing no harm. I wanted to know what have you found that really makes organizations move from doing no harm, which today is not enough. If we just try to avoid doing harm, I think we're in trouble. So what really can move organizations to going from doing harm to no harm and then really doing some positive impact? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, the way I see it is that when you reduce, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, you know, above a threshold, that's actually contributing positively to the SDGs, right? So there's a lot in terms of how you can contribute positively. So that's just one consideration. And the important thing is not just to reduce the harm you're doing, is there are really scientific targets of what we're supposed to achieve. So when we talk about looking at the context and set targets, we need to take that into consideration, right? So just reducing, it's not enough. We really need to achieve certain thresholds. And I will share with you some information on this. That's a challenge because there's not a lot on that, but it's there, right? And so that's one thing. And then the second thing, I believe that if you start by at least being aware of your impacts, whether they're positive or negative, and understand that you can manage them and influence them, and if you embed that in your strategy, naturally, you will see the opportunities for the good, because it's a change of mindset, right? So if really in your process you embed, okay, what are the needs? Remember when you have a new customer or a new market you want to enter, we do this custom market research. Imagine a market research with a lens of impact. What are the real needs, their problems? And then based on your company's products or intelligence or research, you can say, okay, I can also provide this product that I didn't think of, right? That could do good. So for me, it's really kind of, again, bringing back impact in the way we just do management. And in the same way that we look for more clients, imagine the chip, I want more impact too. Can you imagine humanity with everything we have achieved, with our creativity? I think we can do anything where we decide to do if we really have the goal. So for me, really the basic is thinking of impact and starting. And then I'm sure that we will surprise ourselves like when we went to the moon. That's my belief.
Okay, thank you. Belissa, we have one question from Mariana, and then I'll ask Daniela, who also has her hand raised, to ask her question, and then you can maybe reply to both questions, and then we'll move on to Mike. So Mariana Villasuso asked, how did you choose the organizations where SDG Impact was piloted? Bancolombia, Goldman Sachs, etc. Can other organizations be chosen?
Yeah, excellent question. I wasn't there, but many times since I joined, I feel that they join us, they contact us, and of course you can join. So please reach out. We are putting together some working groups. We're starting one for enterprises, and what we have is like the standards converted in a self-diagnostic tool. We prioritize together, we learn together with a peer, and then we're gonna have a roadmap. So the answer is that the more the merrier. You would all be first movers, right? Because this is relatively new, but we really welcome you contacting us to start doing this. And we have a lot of flexibility. So if a working group is not going on, we still have material, we can do one-on-ones, because what we want is that all of you that really want to do it and feel that need support, figure it out together, because it's not that we have all the answers, but we really have the will to make this work. So please reach out.
Thank you. And Daniela, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Belissa, thank you so much for your presentation. It was fantastic. I wanted to ask about the combination of human rights indicators with impact, because you mentioned the principle of no harm. And I was specifically interested in knowing if there's any future plans or perspectives about including human rights indicators and how to measure impact, because there are human rights indicators, they're just not mixed with impact traditionally.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I'm not a human rights expert, so Mike, help me here if you know anything about this. But what I know about human rights is like it's been huge because, for example, you remember when Nike had this problem with child labor, and everybody discovered, oh my God, they're doing child labor, and then basically they did this plan to reduce it over time, right? So, okay, one is that when you think about impact and something that matters to you like human rights, I think there are indicators available that can be embedded in your impact framework. That's why I really like to think about this embedded impact in the way you manage, because what matters to you, you will look for the information and there are resources. So that's number one. But then number two, that's even not as important, is your tolerance to human rights violations. Like in the case of, so you have a client, yes, I have human rights issues. I cannot solve it tomorrow, I bankrupt. Give me 2 years. What do you do? And I had a client that tell me, okay, Belissa, what do I say? He's like, I don't know, ask your stakeholders. That's not Belissa's fund, right? So this is the type of decisions that you will have to make. But I'm happy to give you some resources about human rights. There are some, the WBA World Benchmark Alliance also use some indicators, but at the end of the day is in what you want to measure, that's important for you as goal, impact. Okay, how do you do it? And that's why, and that we discussed that with Mike, ESG, do no harm, do good. What are your goals? And then the tools are gonna come up because we have a lot, as you have seen. But I'm happy to take it offline because I think we really wanna hear Mike. I do.
So Mike, thank you again for joining us. The floor is all yours. Maybe you want to start by complimenting or reacting to Belissa's presentation.
Sorry, I was simultaneously screen sharing and unmuting. Can I both compliment and react to it because I think it's tremendous, and I'm a big fan of Belissa and of the SDG Impact Standards, and I would highly recommend that everybody go to the website and check them out and get involved. Actually, one of the things that Belissa mentioned was the online training platform being developed by the team at Duke University. And Belissa, you don't know this, but actually I enrolled, I got a little bit of early access thanks to my, connections. And I've been filling out I've been taking the course and staying up too late doing all of the quizzes online. It's really excellent. So I highly recommend everybody.
Thank you, Mike. I guess you were in.
So definitely recommend to do that. Okay, so just to pick up a little bit where Belissa left off. So the assignment from Alan was to talk about trends and impact management. And I always try to, Belissa and I, we always try to do our homework. So the trend that I would talk about is integration of impact management with financial management and financial decision making. And in 3 levels, both at the level of individual people and managers and investors, at the level of organizations, and at the level of the system as a whole. At the level of individuals, because I can certainly say that speaking for myself, I always had one part of my brain that could think and talk about impact and another part of my brain that could think about investing and financial risk and return. And it's like those 2 parts of my brain couldn't talk to each other. So I would switch into one mode to talk about impact, and then I'd switch into another mode to talk about financial, the traditional investment, and I had no way to integrate these 2 things. And it took a lot of time to build the connections between the 2 parts of my brain. But I see people all around the world building those connections already. At the organizational level, breaking down the silos between impact and financial management, because typically, certainly in the places where I've worked, there's an investment team or a product team and a financial team. And then maybe in another part of the building, there's an impact team or a sustainability team. And the impact or sustainability team have their own vocabulary that nobody else understands, and their own data sets and their own standards. And it's very hard for the two teams to work together because they speak, in some sense, a different language. And so it's a challenge for the organization to bring together the two sides, the impact or sustainability and the financial and product, and get them to work together as one. And finally, at the systemic level, integration of impact and financial performance through what Belissa was talking about these big debates about materiality that are happening with the standard setters. And when, the voluntary standards like the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board or the Global Reporting Initiative, or even the quasi-regulatory standards like the IFRS Foundation set standards, should they be thinking about only the social and environmental issues that are both important to stakeholders and important for the long-term financial performance of the business? Or should they cast the net wider and look at all of the issues relevant for stakeholders? And without getting into the big debate, both of those require us to think about both issues at the same time, the financial materiality and the materiality for stakeholders. So this is the trend that I see in the market. So having shared that, now I'll go a little bit deeper into one particular approach to help us all build those new muscles of thinking about impact and financial performance at the same time. And I have to say, this is an approach developed at my previous organization, which is Root Capital, where I was head of Impact, which is a social investment fund that lends to smaller farmer cooperatives and businesses in Africa and in all over Latin America. We developed this approach and wrote an article, and then I was giving a presentation in 2018, and Belissa came up to me afterwards and she said, Mike, we developed the same approach. We did the exact same work at the same time in two different organizations with neither side knowing the other did the same. And I only take that as a lesson that, and her organization, by the way, at the time was IDB Invest. And so this is an example, I think, of, I won't say great minds think alike, because I know we're only pretty good minds, but I think it's an example of the trend in the sector of coming up with new and innovative tools for managing all of these issues in an integrated way. Okay, so with that, I properly share my slides, and please, I invite you to all jump in the chat. Also ask me to slow down because I speak too fast. So if you have a hard time understanding, please don't be shy to just chat me to please slow down. Okay, let me maximize my screen. Okay, so do you see the correct view? You do, okay, great. This slide just tells a little bit about the journey that my organization Root Capital went through over the course of the last 10 years. And this is before we had the SDG Impact Standards and before we had the operating principles for impact management. And so we felt that we were just, fighting our way through the wilderness to build our own impact management system with so much less guidance than exists today. And I think about it as climbing this first mountain in the foreground, which I call the impact management mountain, and building our, doing our theory of change and selecting KPIs and metrics and all of these things. And we got up to a certain altitude in that mountain, and we started to feel good about ourselves for maybe just a minute before we saw that there is another mountain behind it that nobody told us about, which is that everything we had done to build an impact management practice, we built in a silo, and then needed to go back and pull it out of its silo to make it useful for decision making, so that as investors, we could eventually get to the far mountain in the distance of constructing and managing a portfolio towards an integrated frontier of impact risk and return and financial risk and return. And this is the series of mountains that I see other investors climbing individually and collectively, and that we founded Impact Frontiers, which is now an initiative of the Impact Management Project, so that we can climb these mountains together, helping one another rather than just all on our own with our own backpacks and our own pickaxes and tools. Yeah. We brought together with the support of the MacArthur Foundation and Omidyar Network, a first group of 13 investors not to copy and paste what Root Capital did, but to go through their own process of getting up these mountains and then share their lessons learned for the benefit of other investors following. And those findings, which I'll share with you in a moment, you can find on the website impactfrontiers.org. There's a sort of profile article in Stanford Social Innovation Review and a handbook with more detail for those who want to go deeper into the methodology. And actually, Belissa, along with all of the members of the collaboration, is a co-author of both of these. So one of the many other contributions that Belissa has already made. We're now launching other cohorts of investors. And so also what I'm sharing will reflect the learnings from these other, it's about 60 investors, sometimes in partnership with industry associations such as Impacto, which I'd love to work with all of you, and where we don't have the right industry association with individual asset classes. Okay, but to the content, the methodology that each investor goes through is to ask themselves, we don't lead with the answers, we lead with the questions. And the 4 foundational questions, the first at the investment level, individual investments, very simple. Which investments do we believe offer the most expected impact and why? And which offer the most expected risk-adjusted financial return? Easy to ask, hard to answer. And then going down to the portfolio level, it's the same questions, but for portfolios of investments. How would you measure the total impact of a portfolio of investments? How would you set goals for the impact of a portfolio? How would you communicate the impact of a portfolio? And how would you do so in a way that's integrated with and supportive of the way you set goals for and manage towards your financial goals at the portfolio level? So these are the questions that each of the investors that I'm talking about asks themselves and uses this approach to come up with their own answers using their own data, their own strategies, their own mission. And the path that they follow as they answer these questions is the following. And again, this is a public good collaboration, so we just share all of the results for anybody to use for free in an open source basis. Is, first, it says here on the slide, create an impact rating. I would actually put it a little differently. I would say create a preference ranking of just which investments do you think have most impact to least and why. And that's a very actionable, decision useful piece of analysis. It's hard to do correctly or to do well, and maybe there's no one correct answer, but it starts in the path of asking better and better questions over time. Like, should I be thinking of my preferences as the investor, or the enterprise preferences, or the preferences of stakeholders? And which, like, how do I, it starts you on the right path of increasing your sophistication in impact management. Do the same thing on financial risk return. What is our preference ranking of investments from greatest to least expected financial return? Put them together and see, what do these two things have to do with each other? Do we find that actually all of the most impactful investments tend also to be the most profitable? Or is there a trade-off? Or is it no pattern at all and it's just all over the place? And I can tell you, working with many investors, I've seen that there's no one answer to the trade-off question. Everybody has their hypotheses and their beliefs, but when they get the data always surprises them. And that's the value of actually beginning to put it into practice with real data. And then, having taken stock of our portfolios, how do we use this for decision making in the future? Do we start thinking about our pipeline in a different way? Do we change our screening, negative or positive screening? Do we have a hurdle rate? Do we have benchmarks? And finally, how do we, as we improve the individual loan or investment underwriting, how can we set goals for improving the impact and the financial performance of the portfolio as a whole? So these are the 4 general steps that all of the investors across asset classes, across geographies, across sectors were able to find their way through. I'll give you one quick example. I think I'll share the root capital example. Just very, very, very briefly. I'll use one particular client of root capital, so Bar of Root Capitals, which is a coffee cooperative called Kaamaber in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, in an area of a former civil war. You can see the gentleman on the boat here this picture is here because if you look at the location of Kalamabur, due to the Civil War, they couldn't actually, the farmers couldn't sell their coffee locally, and they would smuggle it across Lake Albert in a boat like this to barter it for food and supplies on the other side of the lake in Uganda. And this is the board and the management team of the cooperative with very little electricity, running water, internet, legal system and roads, very, very irregular. And this is an African example, but I also could equally look at similar examples from Root Capital's work in Peru, in the highlands of Peru, with in the territories that have been controlled by narcotics, or in Colombia, in the areas formerly controlled by the FARC. So this is a common example of, these are the highest impact loans that I'm picking for the example of showing what do we mean when we say which loans are the highest impact. It's the ones that look like these. And in the service of not just using intuition, but building a system, we looked at those loans and applied the 5 dimensions of impact and other metrics to them to create us. And I'm going to skip over this, but there's more information available to say basically what are the factors that make a loan high impact and how much weight do we apply to each of them so that we can get to one single perspective on which loans are highest impact that everybody in the organization agrees with, which we call our impact rating. And so this is a tool that goes above and beyond the social and environmental screen. So we're not just screening bad things out, we're also saying, even of the loans that we undertake, which are the highest impact and how can we do more of those? This is just a couple of quick slides to say, don't even worry about the numbers or the x-axis. Just imagine that this is a rank ordering of all of the loans in Root Capital's portfolio from the least impact on the left to the highest on the right. And you can see where Kalamabur fell sort of on the right. Okay, so after many years, and it did take many years to get to this point with impact studies and evaluations and everything, I was the head of impact and I said, okay, great, Root Capital, can we please just only do these loans on the right? And they said, Mike, are you crazy? Do you have any idea what those loans cost or what the risks are? And I said, no, but we should do them. And they were, okay, but Mike, you're gonna blow up our company. So I said, okay, we need to build an integrated system to think about how many of those can we afford to do based on our financial goals and constraints. Then we went through another process to figure out what is the risks and profitability of each loan. I'll skip over that until finally I could come back to the team and say, okay, look, now we have a chart with the impact rating on the x-axis, but now on the y-axis, I can also tell you what is the expected profitability of each loan. And so now we can say, okay, so look at these loans on the upper right. These ones are profitable and high impact. Like, for goodness sake, everybody agrees we should do those. Yeah. And then look, I hate to say it, but look in the bottom left corner. Look at these low impact, unprofitable loans. Who did those loans? Well, Root Capital did them, but it's because we didn't have the analytics around risk and return and impact that we developed. And so going forward, Root Capital no longer does these. This is a chart that's 5 years old. And then there's others that are sort of somewhere, they have like high impact, but medium profitability. And we have some that are very, very profitable, but a little bit lower impact. And so it becomes almost like a game of like, okay, which like a shopping cart, which loans do we fill up our portfolio with? Which combination of these loans do we think will construct the portfolio that achieves our integrated impact and financial goals? And each investor that works with Impact Frontiers builds their own version of this chart, where they can plot their own portfolios with their own definition of impact and their own measures of financial return, assess the relationships in their own case, and come up with their own investment strategies going forward. In Root Capital's case, there's a very simple thing to do, which is to just draw a line, which is the dotted blue and red line, which we call the hurdle rate, which is just say, okay, for goodness sake, let's not do loans below the line, especially on the left. But look at all those loans that are right around the break-even point on the right and that are super high impact. Let's try to err on the side of doing all of those. And so the hurdle rate actually tilts down into the right across the slide to show, well, not only qualitatively to show that your capital was willing to take more financial risk in exchange for more impact, but actually to quantify how much financial risk would your capital accept for what kind of impact, and as a way to make consistent, systematic decisions about investing across the whole, 30 countries that are capital invested in. And this is just a chart to say, whereas the previous chart, each dot was a loan, in this chart, each dot is a portfolio of loans. And this is just saying, imagine that your capital spends years dropping those bad loans in the bottom left and going out and finding more good loans in the top right. In principle, you would expect that your capital would increase both the impact performance of the portfolio, and that's here on the x-axis. So you would see that your capital would move to the right. Or you could imagine that your capital could also, it's dropping those unprofitable loans, it's probably improving its financial performance too. So it's moving up, or it could do both. And so this is just a simulation to say at the portfolio level, what is the frontier of possibilities of portfolios that you have, like improved portfolios that your capital could construct by getting better data about impact, as Belissa talked about, combining it with our data about financial risk return, and then using it to make integrated decisions. This is from the first article. I have to say your capital doesn't do all of this fancy, scenario analysis and plotting at the frontier every quarter, and the other investors who've adopted this approach don't either. It usually ends up being much more rough and ready and practical than this, but this is for the sake of explaining the spirit of the approach. Yeah, this is just an example to say of the investors that follow the path. Some found that impact on the x-axis improved along with financial performance. Others found the opposite. So like there's people who debate, is there a trade-off, is there not a trade-off? Well, there's not one right answer. The only thing to do is to get the data in check. But in any case, this is a third investor that piloted the approach. This is one where there was no relationship, but in any case, they could focus on phasing out the investments in the lower left and trying to undertake more investments in the upper right. And that's what the colors essentially mean in this chart. So the takeaways, the siloed in approaches to impact management and financial decision-making leave impact, money are both on the table. Therefore, businesses and investors are finding new ways to put them together that go beyond the negative screening and the positive screening so that they can be smarter investors in targeting the right type of capital to the right type of impact investments, continuously improve their impact performance without sacrificing, or well, I should at least say while meeting their financial goals, and to be able to communicate more clearly internally and externally across asset owners, asset managers, asset classes, sectors, and geographies. We're at the early stages of this journey, working with Belissa and many others, and also IDB Lab and IDB Invest in Latin America, and would love to do more work in Latin America with all of you and beyond in the coming years to continue to improve and refine the very basic steps that the initial cohorts of investors have laid out. So with that, I stop and pass it back to Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. It was very interesting to see how that decision-making process goes with both impact management and financial management. I wanted to ask you a question. When you showed that graph where you have impact in the x-axis and the contribution to margin, at the end of the day, is that done before the investment, or that is data that came after you made the investment? And how do you more or less estimate that financial return if it's prior to the investment? And how do you consolidate those both data points?
No, it's a profound question. Thank you, Alan. And we want it to be useful for decision-making. In order to be useful for decision-making, it has to be before you make the investment decision based on the data that you have available at the time. And so the approach is to first gather and analyze all of the past experiences and approaches and data to create a predictive tool that will help you predict. And it's only a prediction. That's why it's called the expected impact rating, not the true, 100% true guaranteed impact rating, to make an informed prediction, the best prediction that you're able to make with available data of which investments will have the most impact and the most financial return. And I think about it like the risk rating at a bank, where for those who have worked at a commercial bank, every few years, the bank will revisit its credit risk scoring system in light of the defaults that happened over the past 2 years, and then launch the new risk scoring system. It's the same with this. You have to develop a predictive tool, but then you also have to check it against what actually happened so that you can continue to improve your predictive power over time.
Not sure if there's people from the audience who would like to make any questions, both to Belissa or Michael.
Daniel, I think there's a question on the chat.
Oh, I see, Daniel, thank you. Yeah, we did. Root Capital actually does offer both financial management training as well as lending. And the two services, of course, are very complementary. And one of the challenges for us was to take into account the cost and the value of the financial management training that we offered when thinking about what is the total cost of this client through capital, if that makes sense. So that was a particular challenge. I didn't go deep on that question in this case because it's a little bit specific, but it's a great question.
Michael, I'm wondering, I'm not sure if this is going to be a stupid question or not, but
no such thing.
Thinking that there are a lot of foundations who are part of Impacto. Obviously, they won't, they're not interested in that x-axis of margin contribution. But I wonder if there's any other measure of measuring the efficiency of a donation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, many of the partners in the collaboration were, philanthropic investors, family offices, investors that are willing to accept some kind of concession in financial risk and return. And those came up with, and I'll share the handbook with you. You can see examples of ways that they came up with across asset classes to estimate how much financial concession was embedded in each investment relative to its market benchmark, and then use that as the common denominator in the financial access to compare to how much impact did each investment generate. So that they could, because even though they're willing to accept a financial concession, in some cases, they still want to be smart investors. They want to use resources well. And so that becomes a way to have a systematic approach for deploying concessionary capital towards the greatest impact. And for those that both provided concessionary capital as well as grants, then you can just take the dollar value of the expected financial concession embedded in or implicit in the transaction and compare it to the dollar value of a grant and say, okay, so we did this, $1 million loan, but we think the financial concession was about $100,000. Do we think that's $100,000 worth of impact compared to this other $100,000 grant that we made? So there's a little bit of translation required, but it's absolutely possible.
Any other questions? We have Maggie. Maggie, do you want to open your mic and ask your question directly?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. My question was if the social impact ratings, are they determined by each investor and asset manager? Do you give guidance on which tools they could use? Thank you.
No, it's such a great question. Thank you, Maggie. It is. It's developed by each investor and guider. So I mean, I've been involved in many of the debates about standardization and standardized metrics, but in this particular cohort, we really wanted to focus on developing approaches that would be embraced and implemented by each organization, and not just by the impact person at the organization, but also the chief investment officer and the chief program officer and the chief of communications. And so therefore we embraced customization and just provided as much help as we could to where could investors look for the right metrics and checking in terms of 5 dimensions of impact, and really help them to develop a technically sophisticated but customized version for themselves. and then at the end of the project, looking across at all of the successful implementations and seeing what are the common themes. So that was our approach here. I think there is more standardization to be done and definitely support that. But I also think there's a risk of standardizing before you have something that can be embraced by the organization. So there's always that balance to strike, if that makes sense. Belissa, I'm curious, do you have thoughts on that too? I know that you went through similar questions at your previous organizations.
Yeah, and well, the fun thing is that at IDB Invest, we didn't use the IMP 5 dimensions. So for those of you that work on foundations, at the end, the impact rating should reflect, again, what are your goals, right? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And it's a scorecard. So I think I would say that to me, what's easier to standardize are first the metrics, the outcome indicators, but maybe the impact rating is a decision-making tool. And a decision-making tool will depend on the organization priorities, right? Given your stakeholders, your clients, so I mean, we had the discussion, but one thing is the standardization of metrics to measure outcomes, for example, for education, that there's a lot of literature, there are indicators that everybody uses, or let's take the example of the vaccine, right? Herd immunity. I mean, there are things that are standard. Now, what do you value as an organization and is aligned to your goals? For that, to me, the impact ratings help you making decisions among different options. And they're a summary of that expected impact or actual impact to be able to take decisions that are managerial. And what I have seen, just as a reflection again, and I think these IFC reports create impact, talks a little bit about monetization, ratings, and other options. I think it's really interesting, is to understand you want the tool for what. And to me, the impact frontiers tool and the impact ratings are tools for decision making. When you have a portfolio that that is vast with different options and you need to take decisions. Now you want to know the impact of your investment of your company, then you will have to go to maybe standardized metrics when they're available and maybe some customized. And there are different ways of processing information from different purposes. So I mean, I didn't want to deviate your question, but just to tell you that the tool is for what, right? So again, we go back to the decision-making, the optimization, and the impact rating. To me right now, I think there's going to be some time before they get standardized. And what they can tell you is, you have an impact rating, I have an impact rating. We follow the best practices to build it, but our preferences and hopefully one day, not the preference, the context is different. So since I'm working in Colombia, this SDG is a priority and not this other one, but it's different in Peru, right? But the structures are, I think what Mike showed, and I really like, Mike, that you did that, the environmental part, the social part, the additionality. I think those boxes, I think they're getting pretty standard, right, Mike? I think it's, I mean, social, environmental, additionality, negative, positive. I mean, there's only so much you can mention in terms of dimensions. So that's, I think, a good start. But then I think there will be some customization before we get to any further standardization. There are some that also add economic analysis on it, like I did on my previous job. So it's really about, the tools you have available, again, for taking decisions.
Belissa and Michael, knowing that we'll have 5 more minutes, just wanted to finish up with one question for each. Before closing, and it would be probably, if you'd like the participants to take one takeaway from today, knowing that you have different organizations that are philanthropical, investors, companies, knowing that you have beginners and organizations that are probably more advanced in their impact measurement. What would be the one takeaway you would like to take or share with this wide audience today?
I can start I don't know, I see it very simply. Always remember the why, the goal, and then the tools are gonna come up and it's gonna be intuitive and easy. So if it's logic, it's easy. And you will discover the answers just in the, well, Mike is really smart, right? But he came up with a solution because he had the right questions, right? There were things he wanted to get the answers to, and he developed a methodology. So what I would say is for what? So instead of, oh, I'm adopting this standard, I'm adopting this other, I'm following GRM, but for what? At the end, what is it that you're trying to achieve? I think for me, that's a very simple thing, but the main takeaway that I'm learning is always remember what is it that you're trying to achieve, and then you go to the how and not the other way around, especially with all these trends of new tools and standards and all that. That's it. Thank you, Alan, for asking.
Michael, you can't reply with the same answer as Belissa, so I'm going to challenge you with another takeaway.
I was feeling shy, so I let Belissa go first, but then she did the better one. No, if I had to say anything, I would say break down the barriers and the silos in each of our minds and our organizations and in society as a whole between how we think about impact and financial issues, so that we can make better decisions that encompass all of those factors.
Okay, well, those are two great takeaways. Thank you very much, Belissa, Michael, for being here, sharing all that experience and insights. Thank you all the participants who joined us today. And somebody asked me if the recording is going to be shared. Yes, we'll probably have it by next week in our YouTube channel. So thank you again, and hopefully you'll join us for our next events at Impacto. You can visit our website, latimpacto.org, and you'll see in our menu the link to events where you can see what's coming up next. So thank you again, and have a good day.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mike. Nice to see you. Bye, Alan. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for those that turned on the camera. It's really nice to see the faces.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you, Daniel. And